New Mexico, 1947. Deep in the desert, close to the town of Roswell, it said that a crash-landed alien spacecraft was found. The next day, the Army denied it. Case closed? No way. For over 50 years, investigations and revelations have kept the Roswell crash landing alive. Flying saucers, little green men. The reason Roswell has become part of a collective memory is because it was founded on fears and questions that were very real. A product of the Cold War and reinforced by conspiracy theorists, Roswell symbolizes a world overwhelmed by progress and technology.
Carrière de gangster. 10 jours après la découverte du corps du petit gars provoqué ce nouveau un véritable séisme en Belgique.
Southwest of the United States, New Mexico. Summer 1947. As he was inspecting the ranch where he worked, William Mac Brazel discovered strange clusters of debris scattered over the ground. He set off to Roswell to report what he'd seen to the sheriff. The area contained a number of military bases, so the sheriff decided to alert the nearest air base. And the military sent out its men to collect the debris. A few hours later, the Roswell base issued a mind-blowing press release.
The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
At first reported in a local newspaper, the news was quickly taken up by the national press. The public showed little interest in the story until later, in that summer of 1947, when numerous Americans claimed to have seen strange objects flying in the sky. But at Roswell, one of them had supposedly crashed and been found.
Army officers say the missile, found sometime last week, has been inspected at Roswell, New Mexico.
The news was soon broadcast on radio stations. Then other people came out claiming to have seen strange things. Nearly every newspaper in the US had an article, sometimes on the front page, about objects in the sky. But they weren't nicknamed flying saucers yet.
The term flying saucer began to appear. It was due to the airline pilot, Kenneth Arnold. He claimed to have seen 9 mysterious objects flying at a mind-blowing speed. And he made drawings of them.
The intriguing thing was the shape. They were flat, rounded at the front and triangular at the back. So not saucers, more like flat pebbles that you skim across a lake. Then the press came up with the term flying saucers or flying discs to qualify the phenomena that had been spotted by a number of eyewitnesses.
CBS reports UFO. Friend, foe, or fantasy.
Recently widespread, television also leaped on the phenomenon, giving a soapbox to believers in an extraterrestrial world.
You just fall across the road and hover over there a minute and then drop to the ground?
Apparently it was an object. I don't know exactly what it was. It was a bright blue object.
When the Roswell incident news broke, up to 900 sightings were reported. The press made a big fuss over flying saucers. That was when Roswell entered everyone's minds, the rumor that objects were flying around in American skies.
The rumor worried local military staff. The case was sent higher up, and the precious Roswell debris was flown to a base in Texas, where it was examined by secret operations experts.
It's important to remember that probably many of the UFO sightings at the time were due to testing of new aircraft. U.S. intelligence agencies, like the Central Intelligence Agency, and also, of course, the U.S. Air Force, were not necessarily looking into the issue of whether or not UFOs were really alien vehicles, but their biggest question was, do they pose a threat to the security of the United States, which is a very different issue.
Then came a bombshell. Having examined the debris, the Army called in the press to disclaim the find. The whole thing was a misunderstanding. The debris was the remains of a weather balloon. The case was buried. But 30 years later, the Roswell debris would return to life. Since that summer of '47, the American people's interest in flying saucers had continued to grow. Scientific associations and private researchers saw the day. They became known as ufologists.
The believer is someone who accepts the idea that there are real UFOs and directs his attention to the question, why are they here? What are they doing? What do they want from us? What are their motivations?
They continued to investigate and published their findings. What were these strange saucers? And moreover, were they of extraterrestrial origin? In 1980, a book revived the Roswell case. It revealed the investigation led by two ufologists, William Moore and Stanton Friedman.
The story was totally unknown. People had forgotten about it. Then it suddenly re-emerged. William Moore and Stanton Friedman investigated and found other direct and indirect witnesses, often the children of army men at the time. Yeah, my dad told me this or that. And they concluded that quite a large number of people at the time had been involved in the recovery of a craft which had crashed nearby.
We've done hundreds, maybe perhaps thousands of hours of research in the National Archives, presidential libraries, the Archives of Canada, and on and on.
Their big scoop came when they met Jesse Marcel. He was one of the men the Army sent to collect the debris. And what he told them was barely believable.
You found a piece of metal. Felt like you had nothing in your hands. It wasn't any thicker than the foil out of a pack of cigarettes. You couldn't even bend it, you couldn't dead it. Even with a sledgehammer would bounce off of it. It was not anything from this earth that I'm quite sure of.
This eyewitness account placed Roswell back at the heart of the debate on the existence of aliens. But the ufologists' investigation didn't stop there.
We had a lot of stories that we tracked down to some extent about bodies being found, involving a civil engineer working for the state there, and about people in the area seeing the bodies and then being told to shut up.
At Roswell, the Army not only recovered the remains of an alien vessel, but supposedly its occupants too. Real aliens which they examined and kept top secret. The book was a bestseller. It made Roswell the cornerstone of UFO mythology. Part of the American public was now convinced that extraterrestrials were visiting us and that the Army knew all about it. The fact that this belief grew out of all proportion is because the United States was fertile ground. In the early 20th century, the popular press published fictional stories about the Earth being invaded by a people from outer space.
One of the main things to generate the UFO phenomenon was science fiction. Back in the 1920s, pulp magazines began to appear, and many of these were science fiction stories. When you read these stories and analyze them in detail, you realize they already contain all the elements we'd later find in stories about UFOs. We could call it the precedence of science fiction on the UFO phenomenon.
There are lots of illustrations in American pulp magazines showing immaculate flying saucers well before 1947. Years before, this science fiction showed us objects and flying machines. It showed them in a real scientific and technological context, not as magic or sorcery, but as science and technology. These were the technological dreams of the day, but the strange thing is, it surfaced as a news story in 1947.
9 years before the Roswell incident, the rumor of an alien invasion caused uproar in the United States. On the night of Halloween 1938, CBS aired a radio adaptation of H.G. Wells' famous science fiction novel, The War of the Worlds. The radio play, directed by a young Orson Welles, was presented in the form of news flashes reporting a Martian attack on New Jersey. The program sent a wave of panic through listeners who were unable to tell the difference between fact and fiction.
When Orson Welles broadcast his radio play announcing that Martians were attacking the Earth, listeners in the area where the attack was supposed to be happening were extremely afraid. So there had already been a precedent to Roswell, which showed there could be a very strong sociological reaction to the idea of alien invaders.
We're deeply shocked and deeply regretful about the results of last night's broadcast. Radio is new and we are learning about the effect it has on people.
That event was a kind of rehearsal for the idea that the public was prepared to believe almost anything, start to panic, and believe in Martians and all the other things that filled the pages of science fiction magazines at the time. And the story of the event would resurface in the summer of '47. When the Roswell incident emerged, people referred to Orson Welles. He was even interviewed to find out what he thought about flying saucers, because people saw a link with this new kind of, not panic, but general anxiety about things going on in the sky.
In 1947, this general anxiety was even stronger because it was underlined by the fear of a real enemy, the Soviet Union. In the United States, the climate of fear that had taken hold was conducive to all kinds of fantasies.
It's true that during the Cold War, some Americans were very worried that some of the UFOs observed might be vessels with unknown, highly advanced human technology, Russian technology.
Many people in the United States were afraid of the Soviet Union, and even you could imagine a scenario where the Soviet Union would raise fears about a UFO threat to mask their own intentions, possibly even an attack on the United States.
Out of its hangar at Burbank, California, comes a genuine flying saucer. The plane certainly presents quite a new silhouette. Its long-range radar vision will be used for giving early warning of enemy attack to ships of the United States fleet.
Against the backdrop of the Cold War, the arms race reached its peak in the nuclear field. With the perfecting of the atom bomb, the specter of the end of the world haunted the United States. Fear of Soviet power and fear of an alien attack were intermingled in people's minds.
There is a great fear of communists, and I think this could well have contributed to the atmosphere of fear of the unknown and fear of unidentified flying objects.
The motion picture industry leaped at the phenomenon and began mass-producing popular movies.
Flying saucers have invaded our planet. Washington, London, Paris, Moscow are key targets. The whole world is under attack.
In the movies depicting different versions of the end of the world, flying saucers became the perfect metaphor for the Red Peril.
1950s was the age of science fiction, with the long series of B-movies which were crammed with flying saucers. Most people saw them as popular movies not to be taken too seriously.
While the movie industry was playing with flying saucers, the U.S. Air Force was on full alert. In the late 1940s, scanning the sky had become top priority.
For the military, it was part of their job to take the UFO phenomenon seriously. Not that they believed extraterrestrials to be real, but because some of the sightings could in fact be military aircraft belonging to another nation.
Reporters questioned the military, asking, "What are these things flying in the sky? Are they yours?"
And so it was. In 1947, in top secret, the Air Force deployed teams of military experts tasked with studying the UFO phenomenon, like with the Project Blue Book.
The first people to seriously study the hypothesis of alien incursions into our skies were US Air Force experts in 1948.
When Project Blue Book was created and when it was active, it was not known to the public. That was not its function. In fact, I suspect that in many cases they were trying to ease public fears about UFOs and were simply dealing with the queries but not publicizing the fact that such a project existed and was looking into UFOs very seriously.
But one more crucial ingredient was needed to fabricate the Roswell incident. Several decades after the events, the Army's silence on these mysterious UFOs would encounter a growing trend in the U.S. Conspiracy theories, inspired primarily by the rumors surrounding the assassination of JFK and the identity of his killer. 10 years later, the Watergate scandal convinced Americans even more that the government was hiding the truth from them.
What I knew and what I did. Therefore, I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow.
Conspiracy theories were much more prevalent. So people were much more willing to believe that the government was engaged in a cover-up in some sort of a conspiracy.
Conspiracy theories fill a social function. They reassure society about its values and about its standards, regarding what it doesn't understand. Conspiracy theories, in the same way as rumors, are born mainly, not only, but mainly, during times of social uncertainty and indetermination.
So it was at a conspiracy theory peak that the book on Friedman and Moore came out. And in 1980, Roswell became the Watergate of the cosmos.
The conspiracy theory is omnipresent in American political history. And that's why the Roswell incident grew into a conspiracy theory myth linked to ufological theories.
In the early 1990s, some Americans believed the military wasn't telling them everything. Backed by the press, they put so much pressure on the Pentagon that the government took the unprecedented decision to declassify the secret documents of the Air Force. In 1994, a 1,000-page report was made public. When it was presented to the press, the military admitted to having lied about the Roswell incident.
We're confident once the report is out and digested by the public that this will be the final word on the Roswell incident. The conclusion of the first report left no doubt that what was recovered near Roswell, New Mexico in July 1947 was debris from a formerly top-secret Army Air Forces research project, code-named Mogul.
So it wasn't a simple weather balloon, but a highly sophisticated device developed at the start of the Cold War to spy on the Soviets. A balloon capable of detecting shock waves from nuclear explosions. As for the bodies supposedly recovered by the Army, that was without a doubt a misunderstanding by eyewitnesses. They must have mistaken the dummies ejected from jet planes during crash test flights for aliens.
But over that period of time, dummies were dropped all around there. And I think it's logical to assume that the people there saw Air Force ambulances come out, they saw gurneys come out, they saw body bags come out because the dummies were put into body bags to protect them.
But the revelations came too late. some ufologists merely saw it as another cover-up to keep the truth about UFOs top secret.
I think the fact that the government had issued one cover story led many of the conspiracy theorists to believe that the second story was also a cover-up.
There you reach a level of controversy that's totally impossible to stabilize once the conspiracy theory and the idea of secrets and hidden information has taken hold. And the military largely contributed to reinforcing this idea by admitting to having lied in 1947. So the story took off and then it couldn't be stopped.
In 1995, TV gave the Roswell story a new twist, with a filmed autopsy performed by military surgeons on an alien recovered at Roswell. The origin of the film was surrounded in mystery. It was a bombshell.
There was very little chance of the film being authentic. In 1947, they were already filming in colour, not in black and white. And whenever the cameraman films in close up, it's out of focus. The details are blurred. That would have been considered a disaster, and the guy would have been fired immediately. So it's hard to imagine the most important film in the history of mankind being filmed by a complete amateur. That would have been a catastrophe.
However obvious the deception was, as the influence of internet grew, the film raised endless forum debates.
The increase in the number of debates, notably concerning Roswell, dates from the mid-1990s when internet appeared. What's really interesting is, when you compile a history of the debates, you realize that ufologists, and particularly conspiracy theorists, were among the first to use all the earliest forms of internet. So they immediately grasped the interest of using internet networks.
Propagated by the web, the face of the Roswell incident is now a little alien with almond-shaped eyes. It crossed American borders to enter into international urban legend. The extraterrestrial myth has found its home. The city of Roswell has become its sanctuary and has no scruples about cashing in on it.
Because I've read about this for so many years, and I do believe it happened, and I wanted to come here and experience what all the other people here are here to get out of it, to see where it took place. And
Roswell has become a vast superstore with aliens for sale on every street corner.
Roswell has become a kind of huge amusement park and a major tourist attraction for ufologists. It's a sacred site for them. They go on pilgrimages to Roswell, like people who go to Lourdes.
The crash zone is also a mass pilgrimage site. Roswell has become the epicenter of all ufological beliefs.
UFO mythology has become more and more complex over the decades. At first, all people saw were flying saucers. Then, stories of alien kidnapping started to come out.
My mother and I have both had close encounters of the fourth kind. We've been transported aboard a UFO of some sort of craft. We've undergone physical examination, mind scan process, and reproductive processes. They're creating a hybrid race between humans and extraterrestrials.
We've seen all kinds of extreme theses expounded about reptilians, the existence of a hybrid race on Earth, half man, half alien, who are the true masters of our planet. People cite as notable reptilians Prince Charles, the Queen of England, Nicolas Sarkozy, Barack Obama, etc.
The movie industry has also been inspired by the motifs developed by the Roswell incident. The end of the world, conspiracies, and extraterrestrials go together well in Hollywood.
There are a vast number of offshoots in American movies and TV series, like The X-Files, The Invaders. In movies, it's Close Encounters, E.T., Men in Black, Mars Attacks. It's an endless list of Hollywood movies on the notion of an alien invasion and a government cover-up.
The reason the interest in Roswell is still so high 70 years after the incident could be because it asks a much deeper question. China has just built the world's largest telescope aimed at picking up every signal coming from space.
The question regarding aliens probably isn't the right question to ask. The real question is it possible that other forms of life exist in space?
I think it would be very strange if we were all alone in the universe. So if I were a gambling man, I'd bet on us not being alone.
The cornerstone of the alien myth, the Roswell incident also asks about the modern world, about the possibility of an elsewhere, the fragility of human fate, and the existence of a world beyond the world.